Let me first of all welcome all of our guests. We're just so delighted to have you all. And I want to thank you again for the gracious hospitality that was shown to me as I visited with you all, and I really, really enjoyed it. And the weather was, it was all Canadian. And I enjoyed that also. We'll get started. Today I want to welcome our friends from the north, from Canada, to continue the committee's very important conversation about how we pursue two critical goals: ensuring energy security and addressing climate change. These two goals aren't mutually exclusive, and it's imperative that we address both. We all agree that Putin has used Russia's oil and gas resources as a weapon to inflict terrible pain on the Ukrainian people and on Europe. And other energy-rich autocracies are taking note. We'd be fools to think that Xi Jinping won't consider using similar playbook, leveraging China's control over global critical minerals supply chains. But Putin's aggression is bringing the free world closer together than ever, setting the stage for a new alliance around energy, minerals, and climate. Building this alliance should start here in North America, and that's why I'm excited to hear today about how we can strengthen the energy and minerals partnership between the United States and Canada. Canada is our largest energy trading partner. They have strong climate goals, and they share our democratic values. This is why I recently traveled to Alberta at the invitation of Premier Kenney. I spent 2 days getting a better understanding of our energy, minerals, and manufacturing partnership through meetings with representatives from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the Northwest Territories, the federal government, and tribal and industry partners. Canadians and Americans share a deep history and are natural partners, sharing the longest land border on Earth. Our people fought side by side in 2 world wars. In fact, some of the uranium used by the Manhattan Project was mined in Canada's Northwest Territories and refined in Ontario. We have cultivated a strong manufacturing partnership, particularly in the automotive industry, with Canada today being our biggest export market for vehicles. Cars assembled in Canada contain, on average, more than 50% of U.S. value and parts. Today, we also trade over 58 terawatt hours of electricity, 2.4 billion barrels of petroleum products, and 3.6 trillion cubic feet of natural gas each year. In fact, energy alone represents $120 billion of the annual trade between our countries. Across all sectors, the U.S. and Canada trade more than $2 billion daily. That's $2 billion daily. There is no better symbol of our energy relationship than our interconnected power grid, which is seamless and integral for the reliable and affordable electricity citizens and industries in both our countries depend on. And we're here for each other during these times of needs. Electricity workers from both the U.S. and Canada regularly cross the border, extreme weather events to help get the power back on when Mother Nature calls. Canada has ramped up all oil exports to the U.S. to offset Russian crude, and members of our committee led legislation to cut off the energy purchases fueling Putin's war machine. We know that a number of U.S. refineries are configured to run on heavy crude, and Canadian heavy crude provides an alternative to sources like Venezuela, which we have sanctioned due to Nicolas Maduro's anti-democratic actions. Canada is also a leading supplier of uranium and critical minerals to the U.S., including those used in advanced batteries such as cobalt, graphite, and nickel. The U.S.-Canada Energy Partnership is strong, but also not without its challenges. I have not been shy in expressing my frustration with the Biden administration cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. In light of Putin's war in Ukraine and the global energy price surge, I think a lot of us wish that project had moved forward today. But to be clear, I'm not holding the hearing to relitigate the past. We are here to advance a stronger and a cleaner U.S.-Canada energy partnerships for the future. Our allies and trading partners in Europe are begging for North American oil and gas to offset the reliance on Russia. There is no reason whatsoever we shouldn't be able to fill that void and do it cleaner than the alternatives. That's because American oil and gas is cleaner than what is produced in Russia, and certainly in Iran and Venezuela. We can do better and learn from our Canadian neighbors and all of us working together. On average, Canada produces oil with 37% lower methane emissions than the U.S. That's technology we can use also. And the Canadian federal government has set even more aggressive methane reduction targets. That's what I mean by climate and security not being mutually exclusive. Replacing Russian product has added the benefit of reducing the emissions profile of the energy Europe needs today. I also strongly believe that we need to be taking security into account as we invest in climate solutions. According to the International Energy Agency, stationary and electric vehicle batteries will account for about half of the mineral demand growth from clean energy technologies over the next 20 years. Unfortunately, China controls 80% of the world's battery material processing, 60% of the world's cathode production, 80% of the world's anode production, and 75% of the world's lithium-ion battery cell production. They have cornered the market, and we allowed it to happen. It makes no sense whatsoever for us to be so heavily invested in electric vehicles as a climate solution when that means increasing our reliance on China. Because right now, we're not simultaneously increasing our mining, our processing, and recycling capacity at the same rate in the United States. The Canadians are ahead of us on critical mineral refining and processing, and we have much to learn from them about how they're able to responsibly permit these activities in timeless that blow our times tables out of the water. I believe there is much that we can collaborate on with Canada to create a powerful North American critical minerals supply chain instead of increasing China's geopolitical leverage. I'm sure our Canadian friends are happy to export minerals to us, but let me be clear. The United States also needs to contribute our part to a North American Minerals Alliance. So I'm very interested in discussing how that we can create an integrated network for raw materials to move across our borders for processing and manufacturing in both of our countries. During this time when U.S. and Canada and our allies and friends are threatened both by dictators weaponizing energy and by intense politicization over climate issues, we must work together to chart a responsible path forward that will ensure security, unlock prosperity for all of our nations. We are the superpower of the world and blessed with abundant energy and mineral resources. We cannot just sit back and let other countries fill the void and find ourselves in a more dire situation in the years ahead. We must be leaning into the responsible production of all energy sources, and we're going to need and strengthening strategic partnerships. Building a North American Energy Alliance is the right thing to do. And with that, I'm going to turn to Ranking Member Brasso for his opening remarks.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I especially want to recognize the Premier Jason Kenney of Alberta for joining us. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Premier. Alberta has much in common with my home state of Wyoming. We have rolling prairies, we have stunning mountain ranges, and we both have an economy built on energy production. We both have an abundance of oil, of natural gas, of coal, and wind resources. We both appreciate the high-paying jobs that come from energy development. And we are both hurt by President Biden's war on energy. In 2003, Canada's estimated recoverable reserves of oil jumped about 175 billion barrels thanks to Albertan oil sands. A few years later, in the United States, a similar bounty was discovered. The application of advanced technologies like hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling launched an energy revolution. It had profound and positive impacts on our nation's economies and standings in the world. These developments in the United States and Canada shifted the world's energy center of gravity from the Middle East and Russia to North America. It's important that we strengthen the energy and resource partnership between the United States and Canada. But Joe Biden's policies are placing it all at risk. The Biden administration made the United States an unreliable partner to Canada by killing the Keystone XL pipeline. Not satisfied with just harming Canadian energy, the president went on and his appointees are doing everything possible to discourage American energy production. We're now less able to support our friends in North America and around the world. We're less able to provide for ourselves. Premier Kenney and I agree that this needs to change. We also need to expand our partnership with Canada beyond energy to critical minerals. This committee has held several hearings this Congress on mining. Demand for minerals worldwide is skyrocketing. Some suggest we import minerals from Canada as an alternative to mining it here at home. I strongly disagree. There is simply no way to meet U.S. and global demand for minerals without opening new mines in the United States. Our nation's federal permitting process is the #1 barrier to increased domestic production of minerals. It takes 10 years on average to permit a mine in the United States. It took us less time to get to the moon. In Canada, It can take as little as 2 years for the similar permits. We should learn from Canada's best practices. Our electricity grids are physically tied with Canada's. There are dozens of interconnections. Electrons know no borders. Our countries face similar risks from blackouts, even as we help each other keep the lights on. Electricity must be reliable and affordable. People suffer and sometimes die otherwise. Electricity policy in both countries could use a dose of reality. The United States and Canada cannot rely on the sun, wind, and wishful thinking alone. Although Canada has a different energy mix for its electric grid, it makes the most of its affordable, reliable, and abundant natural resources. The United States must do the same. We should learn from Canada's permitting success with hydropower and nuclear energy. North American energy is a tremendous geopolitical asset. That means we need a strong energy and mineral partnership with Canada. That requires being strong ourselves by ramping up energy and mineral production here in the United States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. And before we get started, I want to have a little housekeeping measure here. I want to announce that basically the Greek Prime Minister will be addressing a joint meeting on Congress this morning at 10:35. I'm going to be staying here for this hearing, so we're not going to be recessing, but any of the members who might have to leave or want to attend, it's understandable. I think this will be much more interesting, though. So I'm going to now turn to our witnesses. I'm going to introduce them. We have the Honorable Jason Kenney, Premier of Alberta, Canada. We have the Honorable Nathalie Camden, Associate Deputy Minister of Mines at the Quebec Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources. And we have Mr. Francis Bradley, President and Chief Executive Officer of Electricity Canada. We also have joining us virtually is the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson. He's Canada's Minister of Natural Resources. I do understand, Minister Wilkinson, that you have to leave at noon to attend a cabinet meeting, and we'll be cognizant of your timing. Hopefully we'll get our questions to you quickly. With that, we are going to open up with Premier Kenney with his opening remarks.
Thank you so much.
Turn on your mic. There's a little button there. Just push it.
All right.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Chairman Manchin, and to you members of the committee. Thank you especially for having visited us in Alberta. I'm sorry we didn't offer good weather, but come back in the
Great.
summer.
I thought it was all Canada.
Senators, if you remember one thing from today's hearing, I hope it will be this, that the province of Alberta is by far the largest source of U.S. energy imports. U.S. energy security depends on Alberta, and Alberta can be a huge part of the solution to the problem of American energy inflation and the cost of living crisis. Senators, last year, over 60% of U.S. oil and gas imports came from Alberta. That's 60, not 16, 60%. The U.S. Energy Information Administration reports that last year, the United States imported 2.2 billion barrels of crude oil, 1.4 billion of which, or 62%, came from Canada, and virtually all of that from Alberta. Let's put that in perspective. Last year, 13% of U.S. oil imports came from all OPEC countries combined, and only 6% from Saudi Arabia. So Alberta supplies the U.S. with 10 times more oil than Saudi Arabia and 5 times more than all of OPEC. The same is true for natural gas. Last year, my province shipped 4.8 billion cubic feet of gas per day to the U.S. That's 63% of your gas imports. And I'm proud to say that Alberta is home to the world's third largest proven and probable oil reserves, about 180 billion barrels worth, and one of the world's largest reserves of natural gas. The province of Alberta owns those resources and has the exclusive constitutional jurisdiction to regulate their production. Now, after your country has spent hundreds of billions of dollars in recent decades defending security in the Persian Gulf area, it turns out that the solution to the challenges of energy security is your closest friend and ally. Vladimir Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine has proven the danger of allowing dictators to dominate global energy markets and weaponize oil wealth, using it to spread violence, instability, and terrorism around the world. And that's why we were, frankly, so taken aback when President Biden vetoed the Keystone XL pipeline. It would have safely delivered 830,000 barrels a day of responsibly produced Canadian energy to the U.S., more than displacing the 670,000 barrels a day that you all bought from Putin's Russia last year. We were also perplexed with the administration's response to sky-high gas prices was to plead with OPEC to produce and sell more oil while working to lift sanctions on dictatorships like Iran and Venezuela. White House officials have reportedly discussed a presidential visit to Saudi Arabia to press for more production of their oil and their exports to the U.S. Oil that is used to buy cluster bombs dropped on Yemeni civilians. Well, Senators, Calgary is a lot closer to Washington than Riyadh, and you don't need the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet to patrol the Great Lakes. To quote former Montana Governor Brian Schweitzer, we don't have to send the National Guard into Alberta. Chairman Manchin, we truly appreciated, as I said, your recent visit to Alberta to see firsthand the amazing progress that is being made to reduce emissions and improve the environmental performance of Canada's oil sands, to see also the deep partnerships between our energy producers and our Indigenous people, and to discuss the development of a North American energy alliance. We invite other members of this committee to visit Alberta and see for yourself, judge for yourself, draw your own conclusions about whether Alberta is a preferable solution preferable as a source of imports to OPEC. Between current unused capacity in the North American pipeline system and the prospect of pipeline optimization, plus the scheduled completion of the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline to Canada's west coast next year, Alberta will be able to increase our crude exports to the U.S. by upwards of 1 million barrels a day over the next couple of years, helping to reduce prices at the pump. But with political will from Washington, we could also get another major pipeline built that would forever allow the United States to free itself from imports from hostile regimes. Mr. Chairman, where there is a will, there is a way. The government of Alberta is keen to work with you and friends in the United States to get another major pipeline built to achieve the dream of North American energy independence and security. At the same time, we must work together to maintain current supply. And that's why I call on the United States government to join Canada in demanding that the governor of Michigan respect the 1977 Canada-U.S. Pipeline Transit Treaty by abandoning her efforts to decommission the Enbridge Line 5 pipeline that has safely delivered over 600,000 barrels of Canadian energy to the U.S. for 6 decades. Her plan to do this would only worsen the energy and cost of living crisis at the worst possible time. And we must work on both sides of the border to remove regulatory barriers to the production and shipment of energy. Senators, replacing conflict oil imports with Canadian energy is not a threat to the environment. We take seriously the need to cut emissions and to address climate change. Alberta's oil and gas producers and pipeline companies have some of the world's highest ESG rankings. Alberta was the first place in North America to implement carbon pricing. Through massive investments in clean tech, we've reduced the carbon footprint of an average barrel of Alberta oil by 36% since the year 2000 to below the global average for heavy oil. Our oil sands producers are committed to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions in their operations by 2050, in part through a big expansion of our world-leading carbon capture, utilization, and storage infrastructure. We're on track to reduce methane emissions by at least 45%. We're leading Canada right now in renewable energy investments, and we're set to become a global hub in the production of net zero and low-emitting hydrogen. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your questions and ongoing collaboration on developing a North American energy alliance.
Thank you, Premier Kenney. And now we're going to go to Natalie Camden.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to share Quebec's mining practices and present how we can grow our relationship. Canada and the U.S. are long-time friends, partners, and allies. During World War II, the U.S. built aluminum smelters for the Allied war effort. Today, Quebec supplies around 60% of the North American aluminum. And thanks to our energy that is 99.8% renewable, it is the greenest in the world. This shared history is more important now than ever. New national security threats demand similar collaboration. For defense purposes, Canadian products are considered domestic, and our trade is further deepened through the USMCA. Quebec stands ready to partner with the United States to address weaknesses in our supply chain. How can we help? First, we have the minerals the U.S. needs, and we are business ready. Quebec's subsoil contains 46 of the 50 minerals deemed critical and strategic by the USGS, including lithium, nickel, cobalt, and graphite, all required for batteries. Our Critical Minerals Action Plan, the first in Canada, sets priorities from exploration to recycling. Quebec is recognized as the 6th most attractive mining jurisdiction in the world. We have 22 mines in operation, 3 in care and maintenance, and 33 mining projects. Second, the transition to EVs and renewable energy is increasing mineral demand. To meet this challenge, Quebec has developed a strategy to build a highly efficient and traceable North American battery supply chain from mine to wheel. And it is already taking shape. Recently, GM, POSCO, and BASF each announced a major CAM facility less than 100 miles from Vermont and Maine. The CAMs developed in Quebec will power GM's next factory in Michigan, as well as facilities in Ohio and Tennessee. The GM POSCO plan is proof. Together, we can create jobs on both sides of the border. For EV manufacturing in North America to be globally competitive, it needs to be truly North American. Like in the US, mining projects in Quebec require numerous permits and authorizations. We have streamlined these processes while increasing social acceptability and transparency. Through government reforms and a new permits coordination office, we cut administrative formalities by over 30%. Cutting red tape generated substantial savings for industry, without, of course, weakening our environmental stewardship. Industry knows that social acceptability and sustainable development are paramount in Quebec. Companies are adopting globally recognized and sustainability certifications and standards. And sustainable development ensures sustainable economic returns. Quebec's hydropower provides stable electricity prices for consumers, be they a mining in Quebec or a household in New England. Quebec is also home to many Indigenous communities. We have concluded modern treaties with the Cree, the Inuit, and the Naskapi that offer companies predictability. In addition to our required consultation process, we promote dialogue amongst Indigenous communities, mining companies, and government at the earliest stage. I want to close by stressing the urgent need to deepen and expand our collaboration. The situation in Ukraine shows energy and resource vulnerabilities of many allied countries. On battery, mineral, and energy issues, the message is the same. The U.S. must diversify its sources, and Quebec is here to help. Working together can ensure our competitiveness, security, and the environment for generations to come. Quebec is just an hour-and-a-half flight from Washington. We invite you to come visit La Belle Province anytime, and perhaps we'll have nice weather, perhaps. And merci beaucoup, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. And now we're going to go to Mr. Bradley.
Right. Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the mutually beneficial electricity relationship between Canada and the U.S. and how it bolsters shared goals for clean energy, energy security, reliability, affordability, and our economies. I'm Francis Bradley with Electricity Canada. We are the voice of the Canadian electricity industry. Our members generate, transmit, distribute, and market electricity across Canada and the U.S. every day. The integrated U.S.-Canada electricity system is critical to the positive North American energy relationship. This relationship is recognized by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, providing for tariff-free treatment of energy trade between our countries. As both countries seek to achieve clean energy goals and to ensure energy security, this partnership offers opportunities to increase the availability and development of reliable and affordable clean energy. Canadians and Americans share a highly integrated electricity grid, connected by over 35 high-voltage transmission lines. Some 30 states engage in electricity trade with Canada each year. Canadian and U.S. electricity companies own and invest in assets on both sides of the border. They work in unity of effort to keep the grid secure and reliable in the face of energy transformation, new security threats, and more extreme weather. Canada has a low-carbon electricity grid, an abundance of reliable, affordable, and dispatchable power, and further clean resource development opportunities. More than 80% of electricity produced in Canada is non-emitting today, predominantly dispatchable hydropower. And trade is not one way. U.S. exports electricity to Canada. Tangible benefits of electricity trade and integration for Americans and Canadians include enhanced reliability and resilience through operational efficiencies and supply diversity, enhanced affordability through efficient price signals and larger markets, greater emissions reductions, and support for developing new renewables and clean energy technologies. Increased cross-border transmission infrastructure can enable further two-way trade and its benefits. The second installment of the Department of Energy's Quadrennial Energy Review stressed that, and I quote, additional cross-border transmission infrastructure with Canada has been projected to lead to lower overall system costs in U.S. border regions, and it could enhance reliability, backstop variable renewable energy development, and enable lower overall emissions of U.S. power consumption. As such, predictable regulatory regimes for energy infrastructure development are important. As in Canada, the U.S. has ambitious clean energy and climate goals at the federal and state level. To transition to net zero, both countries will need every megawatt of non-emitting generation. As such, Canadian non-emitting imports should constitute as clean energy under any climate or clean energy regime. Electricity trade and integration are important tools for bolstering reliable and affordable clean energy supply and development. Now, for example, the Champlain-Hudson Power Express will provide clean power from Canada to New York, building on benefits already existing from electricity trade. Canadian hydropower can help bring more U.S. intermittent resources online by serving as backstop energy to solar and wind. A recent example is the Great Northern Transmission Line, connecting Manitoba hydropower with U.S. wind. Further, Canadian hydro can act as a battery to help reduce U.S. renewable curtailment. A recent MIT paper found that Canadian hydropower can be particularly effective as a complement, not a substitute, for deploying more wind and solar in the Northeast. There is also cooperation on electricity technology leadership. For example, Ontario Power Generation and the Tennessee Valley Authority announced plans to work together on advanced nuclear technology. Another one of my members, Capital Power, is working on carbon capture initiatives at its Genesee facility to support near-zero emitting natural gas power generation to convert captured carbon into carbon nanotubes. The U.S.-Canada electricity relationship extends to bolstering grid resilience. Canadians and Americans work together to address security risks and follow mandatory North American electricity standards. Canadian companies provide mutual assistance, crossing the border to help American electricity companies restore power to customers more quickly in the aftermath of major weather disasters. In conclusion, Canada is a reliable and trusted electricity partner. This partnership has served Canadian and Americans for over 100 years. In the context of climate change and growing cyber and physical threats to the grid, the U.S.-Canada relationship is more important than ever. Thank you.
Minister Wilkinson. It's your
Thank
turn.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to Ranking Member Barrasso for the opportunity to speak with the committee about the interconnected double threat to the national security interests of both of our nations, energy security and climate change. I appear here to share Canada's perspective on these urgent matters with our neighbor, our closest ally, and our largest trading partner in my role as my country's Minister of Natural Resources. I was, as well, until about 6 months ago, Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Let me begin just with a brief word about Ukraine. This brutal, illegal invasion launched by President Putin against the people of Ukraine represents a violation of international law and an unjustified attack on a peaceful people. Canada's support to the Ukrainian people is unshakable. To date, we have provided Ukraine consequential humanitarian, military, and other support, and we are committed to continuing to do so. The International Energy Agency defines energy security as the uninterrupted availability of energy sources at an affordable price. There are some in both of our countries who suggest that given the current urgency of the energy security issue, we must set aside concerns and actions relating to climate change. This position is neither thoughtful nor tenable. Domestic energy security and climate action are increasingly and inextricably tied together. As Canada works to help our European allies at this time of crisis, we are concurrently cutting oil and gas emissions, including through methane regulations, and establishing clean fuel and electricity standards to achieve our ambitious 2030 climate target. If we look to the present situation in Europe, Western European countries are working vigorously to secure predictable energy supplies in the context of an increasingly belligerent and irrational Russia. Short term, Europe is focused on replacing Russian energy imports with those from other countries, while aggressively accelerating a transition towards renewables and hydrogen in the medium term. As the President of the European Commission stated recently, and I quote, "It is our switch to renewables and hydrogen that will make us truly independent." In this context, recent decisions by the United States and Canada to expand hydrocarbon exports to our European friends to displace Russian oil and gas for the short term are entirely appropriate, particularly since these actions are being taken very much within the context of our respective climate change plans. However, it is the shift to domestically produced renewable energy and to hydrogen supplied by stable countries like Canada that will provide true energy security and national security to Europe and to both of our countries. A clean energy transition will deliver energy security and a sustainable future, enabling democratic countries to wean themselves from petro-dictators who weaponize energy. It will strengthen economies and create jobs, and it will respond to the urgent code red for humanity, which is how the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change characterizes the climate crisis which presently confronts us. Given the challenging nature of current geopolitics, the need to be focused on energy security has never been greater, security that can be driven through a Canada-US energy collaboration and through joint action on climate change. Let us commit our countries to the further development of a North American energy powerhouse, one that will facilitate energy security while helping to advance our shared journey down a path to net zero. Canada and the US already have deeply interconnected energy systems. In fact, 60% of US oil imports and 93% of American electricity imports come from Canada. And all of this flows through a network of existing pipelines, very much including Line 5 and cross-border electricity transmission lines. Going forward, there will be a continuing relationship between our countries in the areas of oil and gas. Even in the International Energy Agency's net zero scenario, there will be a need beyond 2050 for about a quarter of current oil production and half of current gas production for use in non-combustion applications, such as petrochemicals, lubricants, solvents, waxes, and hydrogen. And clearly, countries that focus on producing hydrocarbons with ultra-low production emissions are likely to be the last producers standing. In the context of the low-carbon energy transition, the opportunities for Canada-US collaboration and mutual benefit are enormous. For example, critical minerals, all the way from mines to processing to manufacturing to recycling. Hydrogen to fuel our trucks, planes, trains, industries, and even our homes. Production of renewable energy and transmission of clean electricity across our borders, nuclear technology, including small modular reactors, carbon removal technologies, and in the research, development, and the scaling of a wide range of clean technologies. As we partner in these areas, we need to be clear-eyed, ensuring that in moving away from dependence on autocratic hydrocarbon-producing countries, we do not inadvertently end up with similar dependence on other autocratic countries in areas such as critical minerals. I was in Washington last week to advance exactly these conversations because they are critical to the future of our economies and of our planet. Canada is committed to working with you to enhance North American energy security, to fight climate change, and to create jobs and economic opportunity for the citizens of both of our great countries. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Minister. Before we start our questioning, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask all of you to introduce your staff that's traveled with you, and we want to welcome all of them, but if you want to take time and Premier Kenney, if you want to start.
Thanks, Senator. So I'm joined by Alberta's Minister of Energy, Sonia Savage, Minister of the Environment and Parks, Jason Nixon, and Alberta's Senior Rep in the United States, James Rashad.
Thank you all for being here. Honorable Camden.
Yeah, I'm not traveling with people from other people, with people from Quebec, but I'm supporting by the Quebec's office in Washington, D.C., led by Mr. Jean-François Hould, Abigail Hunter, and Justin Margolis.
Welcome to all of you. Mr. Bradley?
Yes, and my local support is Andrew Shaw. Andrew?
Andrew? And Minister Wilkinson, do you have anyone here you'd want to introduce?
Yeah, my Deputy Chief of Staff, Kyle Harrietta, I think is there, and I'm not sure if Ambassador Hillman is there as well, but she has certainly been supporting us through this exercise.
Well, again, welcome to all of our neighbors. We appreciate very much y'all making the effort to be here today. And with that, we'll start with our questioning. And I'm going to start with to both of Premier Kenney and Minister Wilkinson. This is for both of you all. We all know that the demand with COVID-19 and also with Putin's war on Ukraine, the strain that's put on all of us with the North American energy is going to be needed for years to come in order to offset that. We understand that. So I would ask either one of you and both of you to answer this. Have you been in contact with our administration here or your counterpart, Minister Wilkinson or Premier Kenney, any other than us speaking to you from the legislative branch, from the executive branch, anybody speaking to you all concerning increasing oil, natural gas, the things that we're going to need in order to help our allies? You can start with yourself, and now I'll go to Mrs.
Thank you, Senator. The answer, well, I don't have a counterpart in the U.S. government as I'm the leader of a subnational government, but yesterday I did have meetings with officials at the U.S. State Department that we initiated. I will say we found it passing strange that following the invasion of Ukraine, there were clear efforts by the administration to reach out to OPEC, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Iran, but we have no record of any effort by the administration to reach out to Alberta, which, as I said, provides 62% of U.S. oil imports.
Minister Wilkinson, did you all have any conversations or anyone reach out to your counterparts from the U.S.?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Yes, we have had ongoing conversations with the administration. Certainly, I have spoken with Secretary Granholm many, many times since the invasion of Ukraine, and I was at the White House last week having similar conversations. As you know, we have had a number of in-person meetings to discuss how to address this. I think you and I actually met in Paris at the International Energy Agency when Secretary Granholm was there. And the focus very much in terms of increasing production was our announcement of 300,000 additional barrels a day, which we worked with Premier Kenney and the industry on, was partly the product of those conversations because, of course, the offtake to get it to the Gulf has to come from the United States. And we continue to talk about issues like LNG exports, for example.
Have you all increased your production?
Well, yeah.
For the U.S., for us to be able to help our allies around the world?
I'll say yes. Last year was a record year for production and exports. We hit, I think, in December, 4.1 million barrels a day. But Senator, we believe, and we frankly don't agree with the 200,000 barrel estimate of just offered by Minister Wilkinson. We have about 300,000 barrels of daily unused capacity in the North American pipeline system, which we expect to fill this year through increased production. Once that's filled, the economics will probably work for additional shipment by rail, which could be upwards of an additional 200,000 barrels a day. In addition, if midstream companies get serious about it, and if regulators approve it, we could see a series of technical improvements through pipeline optimization and line reversals over the next year or so that could add upwards of another 400,000 barrels a day of potential capacity. And then finally, in Q4 of 2023 and Q1 of 2020.
This would also reduce the United States reliance on OPEC or Saudi or...
Well, I would certainly hope that I think American refineries I know would prefer to buy locally, partly because they get our energy on a discount, since we are currently largely landlocked, and so we are price takers. And I do know that Gulf refineries are very keen to get more access to our heavy supply.
Minister, do you have anything to say on that, Mr. Wilkinson?
No, I think as Premier Kenney said, the focus in the short term has been on looking at ways to essentially utilize existing pipeline capacity. That's where the 300,000 barrels or barrel equivalents comes from, and it was the product, obviously, of work that we did with the pipeline companies, the oil sector, and certainly that is part of the contribution that Canada makes in the same way that the Americans have made a contribution, the Brazilians have, to trying to actually ensure that we are addressing the concerns associated with displacing Russian.
Let me go to the Enbridge 5 pipeline that we talked about, and going under the Great Lakes. With that, we're concerned, and I'm sure as you would understand, we're concerned about the safety of that. We've had no problems, but with the line's age and all that. Do you all have recommendations of how you could secure that and make it safer, and that way less of a danger that people might be concerned about? From both of you all, yes.
Okay, thanks, Senator. Well, first of all, Enbridge has proposed spending upwards of $750 million on this new high-tech, extremely safe subterranean pipeline, and this is to replace the pipeline that's operated safely across the Straits of Mackinac now for 6 decades, delivering about 530,000 barrels a day of light sweet to refineries in Ohio, Pennsylvania, as well as Ontario and Quebec. And what the governor is trying to do is to decommission the current pipeline without the replacement. So that would strangle much of the energy source for the upper Midwest. We appreciate the Government of Canada has filed a complaint under the 1977 Pipeline Transit Treaty, and I'll hand it over to Minister Wilkinson to talk about that.
Minister?
Yeah, and I would say the proponent has indicated a willingness to do whatever needs to be done to address the environmental concerns, and certainly the pipe under the Straits of Mackinac is a key element of that. We think the company has gone above and beyond what is required here, but we are obviously looking to find a resolution that's going to work for all sides. And certainly we have invoked the treaty, which is a treaty between Canada and the United States, which relates to the free flow of pipelines and the products within pipelines. And we look to try to find a way to resolve this. This is an important pipeline, not just for Canada, but I mean, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania get products from this pipeline.
Have we ever had a leak or problem with that pipeline?
Not to my knowledge, not anything significant.
That's my
for 6 decades, correct? And they're willing to basically, I'm understanding, encapsulate that in a tunnel type, so it would prevent it from ever being a danger to the Great Lakes.
That's right, Senator. And I believe what Enbridge needs to proceed more quickly, which is what Michigan would like to see, is an acceleration of the federal regulatory approvals of that. But to stop the current operation would jeopardize energy security for the upper Midwest. There's no doubt about that.
With that, we'll go to Senator Barrasso for his questioning.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Premier Kenney, a couple of things. Time is limited, so I hope if you go yes or no on some of these things. Did killing the Keystone XL pipeline make it more difficult and expensive to move Canadian oil to U.S. refineries?
Yes.
So now Canadian oil, which would have traveled by pipe, will have to be moved by train or truck. Is this more or less environmentally friendly?
Less.
Has killing the pipeline further exacerbated the supply chain issues between our two countries?
Yes.
And So is it fair to say that President Biden's decision to kill the Keystone Pipeline increased cost, harmed the environment, and added to our supply chain troubles?
I think that's a reasonable conclusion.
So you noted in your testimony that Keystone would have been able to move 830,000 barrels a day Canadian oil, significantly more than the 670,000 barrels a day of oil we imported from Russia in 2021. So if Keystone had been built, would Canada have been able to replace that Russian oil?
Oh, yes. And in fact, the operator, TC Energy, had contracts to move that 800,000 barrels plus per day.
So in your testimony, you note that President Biden has pleaded with OPEC and Russia to increase oil output and has worked to remove sanctions on oil exports from Venezuela and Iran. At the same time, the administration continues to block access to energy resources and the infrastructure needed to move them in Alberta and across the U.S., including in my home state of Wyoming. So I was just going to point out today's Wall Street Journal had today, Tuesday, May 17th, Biden's dance with the dictator states, the Biden administration's sanctions dance with the dictator, and they're talking, of course, here about Venezuela's strongman Maduro, dance with the dictator is taking place even as it acts at every turn to restrict U.S. oil and production. So does Biden's policy make any sense for the people of the United States or of Canada?
Well, it's for you to figure out what works for people in the United States, Senator, but I'll just say this. We find it inexplicable that the government of the United States has been more focused on encouraging additional OPEC production than Canadian production.
So, I understand that provinces, rather than the federal Canadian government, takes the lead on permitting many energy projects. So there's some differences in how we do things. Provinces largely own and have the authority to manage the natural resources within their borders. Your staff behind are shaking their head yes across the board. Provinces largely own and have the authority. So in Wyoming and other western states, the federal government owns and manages nearly 70% of the minerals within our state borders. This makes for a very inefficient system. So could you explain to all of us how do provinces, rather than the federal government, make better managers of natural resources?
Well, that is a great question because, Senator, we've developed over, really since 1947, when the first major oil discovery was found in Alberta, we've developed huge expertise, technical expertise, regulatory expertise, policy expertise in oil and gas production. And so I think it's fitting that our Constitution gives exclusive authority over to the provinces over the regulation of the production of natural resources. And I want to thank the Government of Canada for having recognized that in having signed what we call equivalency agreements with Alberta over issues like the regulation of major greenhouse gas emissions, industrial emissions, as well as methane. Because frankly, we're on the ground, we have the technical expertise, much more so than frankly, bureaucrats in Ottawa would have.
Well, when you were here, I texted with the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and he responds back, told him you were here. He said, Kenney is very strong. He was one of my best ministers, so thank you very much for being here. Mr. Bradley, roughly 60% of Canada's electricity comes from hydropower, another 20% from nuclear power. Canada appears to be making the most of its God-given natural energy resources. The United States is blessed with major natural gas amounts, coal, renewable sources as well. Do you believe in an all-of-the-above energy strategy that capitalizes on abundant, reliable, and affordable natural resources to keep the lights on?
Senator, thank you for that question. Yes, at Electricity Canada, particularly in the context of our expectations with respect to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we are and have continued to advocate for an all-of-the-above approach for all types of non-emitting electricity in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now we'll have Senator King.
Thank you very much for being here. Canada, of course, is a neighbor. Maine is the only state in the United States that borders only one other state, but we border two provinces. And I've always considered my foreign policy experience based upon the fact that I can see Canada from Maine. So, sorry, I couldn't resist. Premier Kenney, picking up on some questions from Senator Barrasso, methane is the low-hanging fruit of climate change. It's the most potent greenhouse gas, 80 times more than CO2. I note in your testimony you've lowered it significantly. How did you do that? Was it regulatory? Was it a fee? Was it a carbon fee? What brought that about? Because this is an important topic for our discussion here in the States.
Yeah, through a regulatory approach, really with application of technology that's been developed in the Alberta industry over years. We have committed to, we're the first subnational jurisdiction in North America to commit to methane reduction targets to reduce methane by 45% below the 2014 baseline, and to do that by 2025.
And did you do that? Did you tell industry you can't emit more than X and you have a vigorous inspection regime?
Well, yes, there's a target and there is a rigorous inspection regime. We've seen some incredibly innovative technology developed in our province, which has made a big difference, and a lot of that has now been marketed in the United States, and we'd be happy to share that expertise.
Thank you. And I'd appreciate it if you could follow up, perhaps have your staff give us a monograph on your methane policies, because this is something that's very important to us. Minister Wilkinson, again, not for today because we have such limited time, but perhaps you could have your staff give us some background on how you streamline the permitting process. My position has always been I want the most timely, streamlined, and effective environmental process with the strongest environmental safeguards, and I think that's your standard. I'd like to, how do you do it in Canada, and what lessons can we take here for our permitting process so it doesn't take, as Senator Barrasso pointed out, 10 years to permit a mining operation that we need? So you don't have to answer now, but perhaps you could have your staff supply us with some thoughts on how your permitting process works, and if they could compare it with ours, which is quite Rube Goldberg-ish, that would be very helpful. Ms. Camden, Hydro-Quebec, of course, we went through the difficult New England Connect process in Maine with the connection from Hydro-Quebec to Boston. What tripped that up more than anything else was a section of 56 miles through virgin forest in northern Maine, and that was the sort of focus of a lot of the controversy. Could Hydro-Quebec and the proponents of that proposal think about burying that section of line rather than a strip of clear cutting through the forest? And is that something that's under examination? Because that might relieve a lot of the controversy surrounding that project.
Thank you, Senator, for your question, but this is not in my area of expertise in my portfolio, but I will make sure that the Quebec's office in DC follows up with your staff with an answer on this question. However, if you want, I could share with you the practices that we had put in place in Quebec regarding the streamlining of our processes regarding issue permitting.
I'd very much like to see that. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is a strong commitment from our government to reduce the administrative burden, and each department within the government has to provide a 3-year plan with different measures, being regulatory measure or legal measures.
I don't want to cut you off, but I've got a little clock in front of me that says I only have 36 seconds left.
Okay.
So I want to get one question to Mr. Bradley before I leave.
All right.
I've always been fascinated by the concept that you articulated, and I think needs to be further developed, and that is Hydro-Quebec being, or Canadian Hydro being the battery for New England. Norway is the battery for Denmark right now. And as we move into offshore wind, we could have an excess of energy during certain periods of the day, which we could send north. You could store the water during those periods and then send us the dispatchable hydro. You mentioned this. Do you see this as something that's a feasible option for us?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question, Senator. Indeed, not only do I see it as a feasible option, I think this is going to be how we optimize the system in the future, and it won't just be in the Northwest. It will be interregionally all across North America. We do it at a smaller scale already today. I mentioned that the electricity flow is two-way between Canada and the United States. Often that flow from the United States into Canada is must-run facilities in the United States that overnight are looking for markets and are essentially today being stored in reservoirs as giant batteries.
The big constraint on the development of renewables, of course, is intermittency, and intermittency is solved by some kind of baseload response. We're all talking about batteries and mining and lithium and cobalt and nickel when we've got a gigantic battery already in place in Canada. And I've for 20 years thought that this was a way to offset the intermittency. So I hope that that's something we can work on, and to the extent you're aware of data on that concept and how it could be implemented, please let me know.
Indeed, we sure will. And we've always thought of our reservoirs as giant batteries.
And Denmark and Norway are doing this right as we speak. So this is not an unprecedented idea. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Premier Kenney, it's great to have you with us. Over the last few years, environmental social governance, or ESG, has gone from being something that almost no one knew about, no one had ever even heard of just a couple of years ago, to something that's imposed a sweeping set of obligations imposed on companies, but imposed at this point, not by government, but by financial regulators, by markets, and by institutions around the world, with some government regulators stepping in and starting to embrace these and make them part of their regulatory portfolio. The number one goal of the ESG movement, or at least a primary motivating goal, seems to be to ensure divestment from fossil fuels in any and every way possible. Now, I would imagine that the ESG insanity that we're seeing has made energy development riskier and more expensive in Canada as it has in the United States. What impacts are you seeing from ESG specifically on Alberta's energy sector?
Very significant impacts, Senator. It's one of our primary concerns because there's been, I think, a particularly prejudicial and inaccurate application of ESG principles against investment in financial services to the Canadian oil sands in particular, with, as I say, nearly 180 billion barrels of proven and probable reserves. So our companies report difficulty accessing reinsurance. There's, credit and equity investment. A lot of this emanating from European financial institutions. A lot of it based on a misconception about the emissions profile of Canadian heavy oil, the bitumen. And here's the peculiar thing. Of the top 10 reserves in the world, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Iran, Iraq, Russia, Kuwait, UAE, the US, and Libya. Apart from the United States and Canada, the other 8 top 10 reserves are in countries where energy is developed largely by state-owned enterprises or quasi-state-owned enterprises who are not subject to ESG criteria. So if financial markets strangle the publicly traded, transparent companies in North America, all this will do is ship production to some of these world's worst regimes and their state-owned enterprises that are not subject to market conditions.
So could that mean, sir, that they could be producing oil with really shoddy environmental standards?
Well, they are, and I think the invasion of Ukraine highlights the need for at least a second S in ESG, security. It is bizarre to us that we had European banks say they were going to pull out of the Canadian oil sands while they participated in the IPO for Saudi Aramco and continue to finance Gazprom and Lukoil in Vladimir Putin's Russia, and they're not held to account for financing dictator oil that fuels violence around the world.
Yeah, funny how that works. Now, I assume these things have translated also to higher gasoline prices for consumers in Canada?
Yes, sir.
Now, the Biden administration has been calling in the United States on U.S. oil and gas companies, calling on them to boost production. But he's doing that while simultaneously stalling, or in some cases killing, energy infrastructure projects, pressuring companies to divest from fossil fuels, and setting impossible to meet, never to be satisfied emission standards to power companies. So have Canadian energy companies been hesitant were unable to deploy capital as a result of some of these American energy policies imposed by the Biden administration?
Well, I would say yes, because the cancellation of Keystone XL, for example, has look, there were Canadian upstream producers that had committed to 800,000 barrels per day. They were prepared to make the big investments to produce that and sell it to you. And obviously, they've taken that out of their capital plans.
Now, on his very first day of office, President Biden began his war on North American energy. He began it by killing the Keystone XL pipeline. His response to record high gasoline prices that are really causing American consumers to suffer has been to beg Venezuela and beg Saudi Arabia to ramp up their production. What message do those actions send to our Canadian allies, including to Alberta?
The message, we find it just, all I can say is inexplicable. I was in Houston at Sierra Week talking about how we could get, look, if we really work together, we could get you a couple million more barrels a day of Canadian energy. When I was in Houston, I read that the president's advisors were suggesting he should go to Riyadh to ask the Saudis to generate more. And I just, we have a hard time understanding that.
As do we, as do we. Thank you for helping us understand that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Just like that.
You almost missed it.
First, thank you all for being here. I'm looking up at the screen as well. Appreciate you coming down. I was the mayor of Denver, which is as close to a cousin of Calgary, I think, as we probably can get, and have had several trips to Alberta and actually all across Canada. I'm probably the loudest supporter you'll get from what should be the brotherhood and sisterhood of Canadians in America. One of my best experiences growing up was taking the Cross Canada train with two puppies that were in baggage. So we'd have to get off at each stop and walk the puppies through all these beautiful little towns across western Montana. It was an experience of a lifetime. Let me ask you each a question to start. Ultimately, if the world is going to meet its climate targets, we have to figure out how to decouple the cost of producing energy from the cost of emitting. I know you all talked about this a little bit. Canada is, as you've demonstrated, one of the most ambitious nations on carbon pricing. Your price to set, if I remember right, was at get to $170 by 2030, which is very aggressive and starting, I think it's $150 now. Can you explain for us that pricing of carbon, how that enables your goals for both energy production and reducing emissions? You follow what I'm asking?
Yes, Senator, I think that's probably better directed to Minister Wilkinson in Ottawa, as that's federal policy.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. Putting a price on carbon pollution, and let's be clear, carbon is pollution. It is the cause of climate change, is an important part of actually ensuring that that is taken into account in the context of everything that businesses and individuals do in terms of choices. It drives choices that are lower carbon, and it incents innovation on a go-forward basis. It is one part of a much broader climate plan. I would tell you that Canada has perhaps the most detailed climate plan that exists anywhere on the planet in terms of how we will actually go about achieving our targets. But an important part of that is pricing of carbon pollution, and I will tell you 99.5 economists out of 100 will tell you it's the most efficient and effective way to do it.
Great, thank you. Mr. Bradley, let me ask, China's building I'd say almost an energy empire built on cheap renewable resources enabled by their build out of interregional transmission, building a really massive grid. Since 2014, they've added 260 gigawatts of interregional transmission capacity, while we in the United States have added 3 gigawatts. Can you speak to how better integrating our grids via transmission could enable the U.S. and Canada to leverage our complementary resource strengths to compete with China's clean energy growth strategy? And I heard the earlier discussions about the cross-border transmission, which I think is very, very important. But just within that sense of, you look at China's coal consumption, it's been flat since 2010. They've built more plants, but they're just not using it. They're continuing to do more wind, more solar, and part of it's just this grid.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, Senator. But yes, our trajectory has been very different in Canada than in China. We're not building coal. We're phasing coal out. But yes, the transmission plays an absolutely critical role to be able to enable more intermittent sources of electricity, both within Canada, within the United States, and cross-border. And it is going to be a critical component for us to be able to further expand that non-emitting power. We are going to need more transmission if we're going to bring more intermittent power online.
Great, thank you. Ms. Camden, the hydrogen production goals, again, ambitious, admirable. I think something we in the United States are equally enthusiastic about. Most of Canada's hydrogen is currently produced via steam methane reforming without the accessory carbon capture. One of the main challenges we face here is that makes clean hydrogen much more expensive to produce, at least for now. How do you plan to ensure that as you scale up hydrogen production, that it moves towards clean hydrogen in an affordable manner?
Thank you for your question, Senator. Hydropower enables green hydrogen, and we're working right now in Quebec on a strategy for hydrogen. Unfortunately, it will be released in a few weeks, so I cannot talk about it, and it's not even in my portfolio. So we'll make sure that you get the answer from our Quebec's office in DC.
Great. All right, thank you. I'll restrain myself on the questions on cobalt and lithium. Put them in writing to you so that we can get the answers in the future. I yield back my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Senator Marshall.
Yeah, thank you again, Chairman. Sometimes the solutions to our problems are in our backyard. Thank you for the folks, all of you, your staff, for making the trip down here in person as well as peering online. I, of course, from Kansas, and very much have a little oil patch there. Even some of the oil that was supposed to be coming down the Keystone Pipeline, our refineries had prepared some special instrumentation to accept that oil. So these types of decisions continue to impact all of us in many, many, many ways. I think I want to start just a second with Premier Kenney, if you don't mind. You mentioned about just the improved carbon footprint, the decreased 36% per barrel of Alberta oil, and methane emissions down up to 45%. We're admirable. We admire that. What are you all doing that makes this work?
Technology. And as Senator Manchin has said, we're only going to get as far as tech will take us in reducing emissions. With respect to reducing the emissions intensity for a barrel of bitumen, it's true that extracting bitumen is energy intensive. It requires huge amounts of steam to separate the oil from the sand. Increasingly, the companies are shifting to things like solvents instead of steam, and also changing their energy source, in one case from using petcoke to natural gas. And other efficiencies right across the board. They are exploring with us the possibility of small modular reactors as the future zero-emitting source of energy for extraction. As I say, a lot of locally developed technology that's helped us actually exceed our goals in methane reduction.
Okay, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I've always said that innovation will solve the problem, not federal government, not taxation as well. I want to talk to Minister Camden just for a second about potash. So a large amount of the world's potash is made in Belarus and Russia. Probably some 20 to 40% of the world's exports of those fertilizers go through the Black Sea. The United States, on the other hand, depends very much on potash from Canada. For a lot of reasons that evidently we can't mine it here. I don't know what's different, but it seems like our American companies have given up on mining. And right now, of course, the Chinese are buying lots of your potash as well, and my American farmers are shortchanged. Are there any solutions out there? What are you doing to gear up potash? What's the timetable look like that? Is there any way we can prioritize American farmers, your good ally, over this potash?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. Unfortunately, we don't have potash in Quebec, not at all. So if I may defer this
question. It's in Alberta here. I was trying to
I'll
spread the questions out.
I'll speak for my
I'm
colleague.
happy to take. Happy to take it.
Sure. Go ahead, John.
Okay. So potash is certainly one, and I think this relates to the broader issue around critical minerals. It's uranium and it's nickel and it's cobalt, neither of which the United States has in abundance. So we are certainly focused, as we've discussed, from an energy security perspective and a broader food security perspective as it relates to potash, to try to ensure that we are going to be able to respond to the needs that the United States and Western Europe are going to have as we look to displace sources from Russia. And there is a process going on. Most of the potash is in a province called Saskatchewan, which is where I grew up. We are looking to augment the production, and there is actually a large new mine coming on stream in the next few years. So that is a conversation that is ongoing.
Okay. Premier, anything to add?
Just my neighboring province, Saskatchewan, they have the second largest potash reserves in the world. So, and I should add, they also have the second largest uranium reserves.
But I guess I just want to make a point here, though, that you don't flip a switch and double your production. Is it going to take months or a year or two to kind of make that happen?
Jonathan?
The initial augmentation is actually ongoing right now. It'll be done, I think, within certainly a year. But the new mine that's coming on stream, it's probably 2 to 3 years out. But certainly we are going to see significant increases over the next little while, which will help to ensure that we can wean ourselves off of Russian sources and Belarusian.
Thank you so much, everybody. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to all of our witnesses today. Let me just talk a little bit about the environmental review processes. At a recent hearing this committee had on critical mineral security, I discussed with a witness what we can be doing to improve our environmental review processes and identify conflicts earlier in the process, including ways to avoid litigation or other opposition before a project invests resources and money. The witnesses raised Canada's use of an environmental and social impact assessment, the social being the optimal component, that helps identify and resolves social license to operate issues and other potential conflicts much earlier in the process when compared to our own environmental impact statement processes. And by the way, I'm from Nevada. Over 80% of the land owned by the federal government. So we have an important relationship that we have to constantly engage at the federal level. But I guess my question to the panelists, and maybe Minister Wilkinson or Deputy Minister Camden, will start with you. Can anyone on the panel elaborate on any differences between our permitting systems and where Canada may have a more success in successfully siting and permitting projects on your public lands? And Minister Wilkinson, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. So a couple things. I mean, for mining in particular, some of the permitting and regulatory processes are at the provincial level and some of them are at the federal. Most of the Crown land in Canada is actually the responsibility of the provinces. But I absolutely agree with you that what we have tried to focus on with respect to environmental assessment is having those conversations very early, identifying the critical issues that are going to have to be addressed, whether that's impacts on water, impacts on species at risk, or indigenous concerns, which are a very, very important part of our process in Canada. Trying to ensure that we're isolating the big issues early on and working to try to address those so that you're not 5 years into a process when you run into the wall where there are significant concerns that haven't been addressed. Those are things that, while there are different views on environmental assessment processes even within the Canadian Federation, I think we would all agree that having those conversations very early on is extremely important to expediting the process.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would add that, like Minister Wilkinson said, we do have environmental robust assessment review. We have an independent review board, and usually I would say that when the environmental study are submitted to the government or the board for analysis, it takes between 48 to 60 months before getting the authorization from the government. And during that times, we have public hearings, and all these studies are made public, as well as all the questions sent to the mining companies and the answer given by the companies. They're all made public. So it helps people and local communities and indigenous communities to learn more about what are the issues and concerns. And in that way, it helps for social acceptability too.
Has the analysis of the environmental and social impact assessment added to the time frame it takes to
No,
get permitting?
it's the 48 to 60 months. It's at the moment you submit your environmental study.
Okay.
And then we have the analysis phase, and then we have public hearings. Then after the public hearings, sometimes, often, the recommendation the recommendation will change the projects to improve the projects. And then the government will approve the project.
And at that time, you have all the stakeholders get to weigh in as well, correct?
Yeah, but all that information is public at that time.
Right, right. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you. And now we have Senator Langford.
Thanks, Senator Manchin. So let me continue on that same conversation Senator Cortez Masto was talking about, and that is the permitting process. The 48 to 60 months there, so you're talking 4 or 5 years to be able to go through that process. We have multiple of our mining projects that may take 10, 15 years to be able to go through the permitting. The question that comes up with all of our mining projects is there a deadline where a decision has to be made and the decision's done? Because in the United States, you may go through the permitting process, and at the end of it, there's a lawsuit by some outside group that then they file suit, and then there's the lawsuit process, and then it goes through NEPA evaluation again because the NEPA's expired, and so that's the continual process. One of the things that seems to be missing on our process is there's not a deadline where a decision has to be made and the decision's done. Do you have a point when you get through that 48 to 60 months that you had mentioned before where the decision is made, everyone's been heard, that it's done, whether it's going to happen or not happen?
There is no timeline, but there is a strong commitment by all stakeholders to let people know what kind of information is required in their application. So we have many guidelines. We help mining companies to prepare their studies, and there is no real litigation matter in Quebec after approving mining projects.
So it's not allowed at that point?
It's not allowed. Would you precise your question?
Well, so the litigation's not allowed. Once the province has made the decision, then the decision's made?
It's possible, but it's not just happening. It's not just happening.
Okay. Okay, Minister Wilkinson, you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, look, the idea of certainty around timelines is really important. And to be honest with you, we also need to ensure that we are better aligning state level, provincial level, and federal systems. And we're actually in the process of launching a process to try to align permitting and regulatory processes more effectively, because we actually have to get mines built more quickly. As we think forward to the challenges of critical minerals. But in terms of the process, there is a deadline. And once the decision is taken, yes, you could launch a lawsuit around issues around procedural fairness, for example, but by and large, you are at a point where projects will simply move ahead.
Okay. But we don't have that advantage at this point. We stretch things out for decades in the process, and we need to build more mines here as well, but we can't seem to be able to get through the permitting process to be able to get it done. Premier Kenney, thanks for being here as well for all of you. President Biden's first foreign policy decision that he made January the 20th of 2021 was to say the United States is not going to purchase more oil from Canada, we're going to purchase more oil from Russia. And then he then pressed on that to say, actually, we're not going to purchase more oil from Canada, we're going to purchase more from Russia and OPEC. And that has proven to be a problem, obviously, for the United States. We need to purchase more from Canada in the days ahead and have the consistency of that. You outlined that there is a process that you're currently walking through to be able to increase the capacity for existing pipelines and then to increase the capacity. You're saying up to 1 million barrels a day of increase that could come from Canada based on what's happening right now. Walk me through that process now.
Sure. Right now, in the North American pipeline network, there's about 300,000 barrels of unused capacity that we could fill, and we anticipate that most of that will be filled.
What's preventing you from filling that now?
Nothing is happening. It's happening. Secondly, there would need to be a bunch of technical changes in the network to increase our export capacity through what the midstream companies call pipeline optimization, some line reversals, introduction of drag reduction agents and other technical changes, and they estimate collectively, the midstreamers, that this could add up to 400,000 additional barrels of egress. And then finally, by Q1 of 2024, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which is owned by the Government of Canada, should be operational, adding upwards of 600,000 barrels that will largely be taken by tanker from Vancouver to West Coast U.S. refineries in Washington and California.
Okay. That's because we didn't put a pipeline through the middle of the country. We're having to drive tankers around the edge.
Both of those projects could have gone ahead. It's not an either or, but the veto of KXL reduces our ability to ship 830,000 barrels a day.
Okay, can I ask one more follow-up question on this? I'm about to bump against time.
Go right ahead.
The price of a gallon or a liter, however you are going to determine it from province to province, the price of a gallon of gasoline in Canada is more than it is in the United States. What's the difference there? Why is the price higher in Canada?
Well, we nominate
than the
it
United States?
in liters, so I'm not quite sure how to do the conversion, but we have generally higher taxes on the Canadian side.
Okay. Where does that break down? Is that the provincial, federal,
Well, it's both.
then you've got the carbon tax mixed in there as well?
There's fuel excise taxes, there's a federal consumption tax, and then there's carbon taxes. In Alberta, we have suspended the collection of our fuel tax because of inflation.
Right. What's the carbon tax level in there per liter?
$50 a ton, which comes out to, I think right now, about 13 cents a liter.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Senator Murkowski.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ranking Member Barrasso, thank you for having this hearing. Thank you for inviting our friends and neighbors from Canada. I absolutely concur with Senator Marshall when he says sometimes our solutions are right in our backyard. Look to your neighbors first, and for some strange reason, we have not done that as we have looked to our energy needs with this administration. And Premier Kenney, you said you're having a hard time understanding the Biden administration's approach on this. Know that there are many of us who are also having a hard time understanding where and why the administration has taken the approach that they have. There's a lot of kinship between Alaska and Canada right now. We feel like we have been shunted off to the corner as well, and our opportunity to provide for America's domestic production has been effectively derailed by this administration, whether it's the actions within the NPRA, the recent actions with regards to lease sales in Cook Inlet, or the opportunity that we have within our coastal plain area. So we're also having a hard time understanding the direction from this administration. But I have to ask the question because we saw the response from President Biden after Russia took that first step into Ukraine, and the effort was not to come to Canada as our partner, but to call on Venezuela, to call on Iran for increased production, to turn to OPEC. Is there something different in the product, in the oil itself, in the crude itself, something in Venezuela or Iranian oil that American or Canadian oil doesn't have? Is it cleaner? What would give them that advantage over what we might be able to do here in the United States or in Canada? Is there anything?
Thank you, Senator. I think the best comparator between our oil would be with Venezuela because both are largely heavy oil reservoirs, and we are now at or below the carbon footprint for a barrel of Alberta heavy versus Venezuelan heavy. So there's no environmental advantage. I would add that the Venezuelans, this is a state-owned enterprise in a kleptocracy with zero transparency and zero real commitment to North American-style energy standards, whereas we are dealing with world-class publicly traded companies that rank in the top decile of ESG performance for energy producers in Canada with incredibly ambitious environmental and emissions targets. So I think we probably end up in a comparable sense, penalizing ourselves because we are so self-critical, we are so transparent. I don't think we really know what the emissions profile is of energy being produced in Venezuela and Iran, is my point.
Well, I would agree, and again, Alaska shares many of those same attributes in terms of how we are able to produce in a way that not only minimizes footprint, but in terms of reduced emissions, methane emissions, we are heads and shoulders above not only other countries, but many states as well. But again, it's absolutely incomprehensible why we would not seek those options and avenues that are cleaner, help not only our respective states, but again, this North American Energy Alliance, which to me is just common sense. You know, you have highlighted two things that that the administration has taken that have harmed the ability of Canadian crude to reach our refineries, clearly Keystone, and you also have mentioned this Enbridge Line 5, which I hope the administration is paying heed to your words here. You've talked about optimization. What more can this administration do? We already know what they've done to limit our ability to have better relationship, better partnerships on this energy alliance. But what could they do today? What could this administration do today to help improve this energy relationship between our two nations?
Well, one would be to join Canada in opposing the governor's effort to decommission Line 5. Secondly, working with midstream companies on accelerating approval for the pipeline optimization projects that are likely coming forward. Third, apply the principle we heard earlier about from Quebec about the application of the Title III of the Defence Production Act to the development of critical minerals in Canada. Why not treat Canadian oil and gas the same way?
Those are good recommendations. You know, Canada is one of the few countries that's considered a domestic source under our Defense Production Act under Title III. So that is something that's an area of opportunity that I think we need to push this administration to look to. Mr. Bradley, nobody has really asked you many questions this morning, but as I was listening to your testimony about this great opportunity for electricity and sharing, I was reminded of the discussion that we had many years ago about this green pipeline that would run from Alaska islanded communities with our hydropower connecting with BC's wind and moving it down to California. It was a pipe dream at the time. People told us we were crazy. Obviously, it hasn't happened, but I think about the great opportunities that we have between our two countries for these shared resources. And Mr. Chairman, I don't think there has been a more important and more timely hearing about what we can be doing right now from an energy security perspective than this cooperation and a true North American Energy Alliance. So my suggestion would be that we have an opportunity to take this committee to Alberta for a little bit of a field hearing and see for ourselves, because I think we could learn a lot.
Yeah. Senator Murkowski, you and I went to visit, and you and I went up to Alaska, and when I left you, I went right down to Alberta and talked to all of our friends there. I was, on a bipartisan way, we were both very embarrassed that our country did not turn to ourselves. Alaska was not asked. Our producers in America were not asked. Our friends in Canada were not asked to step up production and help us. Let's help the rest of the world keep ourselves independent. All we're trying to do is a common sense approach. What West Virginians are asking the same questions that you're asking in Alberta and all over Canada, and the same as you're asking in Alaska. That was the reason I thought it was imperative that we invite our friends down to show the interconnecting that we depend on each other. And we can basically do an awful lot and make North America energy, not only energy independent, but we can help our allies around the world, G7, all of them. We can bring all of our friendly countries in. That's what we're trying to do, and use all the best technologies. You all do some things that we think that are very, very good, and we do some things that we think that we can be helpful, and together we can truly move forward. But I'm happy about this too. And with that, we're going to go to Senator Daines.
All right. Chairman,
beat you by 5 minutes. I'm so sorry, Senator Hoeven. You made it before 11:30, and I was so proud of you. But Senator Daines beat you. That's a little inside joke here. that we have. He's a neighbor state. That's okay. You're okay. Okay.
We love North Dakota. We love Alberta, too. They're great neighbors. And Premier Kenney, it's good to see you here again. As you know, Montana and Alberta have long worked together. We have strong economic ties. We share firefighting resources. Our electric grids are intertwined. Two of our national parks connect to form the crown of the continent. The partnership between Montana and Alberta, as well as the United States and Canada, creates jobs, it provides energy and food security, and increases the economic prosperity of both of our countries. Unfortunately, in one stroke of a pen, President Biden, hours after being sworn and hours after talking about uniting America, then divided it when he damaged and undermined that partnership we had when he canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. Premier, you know better than most what the Keystone XL pipeline meant for jobs, revenues, and energy security. I've been spending time with leaders in Eastern Europe. Vladimir Putin has Eastern Europe and Europe over a barrel right now because of dependencies on Russian oil and gas. And that's why Alberta filed a suit against the United States seeking $1.3 billion in damages. Let me just read a line from that filing. The Biden administration's decision to revoke the Keystone XL pipeline, and I quote, resulted in the loss of thousands of jobs, caused systemic harm to the American, Canadian, and Albertan economies, and diminished the highly integrated North American energy system upon which future North American prosperity will continue to rely. We just saw gas prices at an all-time record. My Montana farmers and ranchers are driving up now and seeing diesel at nearly $6 a gallon. That line from that lawsuit, I think, sums it all up. As you point out in your testimony, when gas and energy prices hit record heights, families are struggling. Instead of calling on U.S. and Canadian producers, President Biden went to OPEC, Venezuela, and Iran. It's like a Babylon Bee parody, but it was reality from this administration. Energy security is national security, and we should be increasing North American production, not going to foreign adversaries. Premier Kenney, do you worry that the Biden administration's arbitrary decision to kill the Keystone XL pipeline, and I say arbitrary because I don't see any sense from an environmental viewpoint, economic viewpoint, it's the most carbon-friendly way to transport a liquid. It kills thousands of jobs. Could that possibly lead to further decisions to kill transporter pipelines? And by the way, there are 70 operating oil and gas pipelines in the United States and Canada as we wake up here today. 31 for oil, 39 natural gas. Could this lead to further decisions that connect Alberta and Canada to the United States? And what can we do to continue to strengthen the Montana-Alberta energy partnership?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. Good to see you again. The answer is yes. I'm concerned it creates a very problematic precedent to retroactively veto a project that's been approved. The border crossing of the KXL had been built between Saskatchewan and Montana with the government of Alberta as a co-owner. So you have a foreign government investing in a project, making an investment predicated on the certainty of the U.S. regulatory process, clearly in the mutual economic interests of both countries, being retroactively vetoed. And frankly, when I then looked at the political pressure coming from Governor Whitmer to shut down Line 5, which her state depends on as a major energy source, wondering, is it possible a U.S. administration, with a flick of a pen, will shut down a 6-decade-old safely operating pipeline? It's created a serious problem of investor confidence. You are right, the U.S. State Department under former Secretary Clinton concluded not once but twice through exhaustive studies that KXL would have had a lower emissions profile than the alternative, which is increasingly shipping by rail. And I would point out that most of the major U.S. unions supported the steelworkers, Teamsters, building trades, and others. Now it's done and dusted. KXL is behind us, but I hope that the invasion of Ukraine and the imperative of energy security causes a fundamental rethink about these issues in Washington.
Well, I hope it wakes up the woke, because it's a dangerous ideology, and people are suffering because of what this administration is doing of this keep it in the ground, shut off fossil fuels. And it's a huge concern, as you've heard today here from many on this committee. Premier Kenney, by failing to mirror the aggressive steps that Alberta has taken to increase and streamline timber harvest, The Biden administration has also failed to be a partner to Alberta in pursuing climate objectives. Over the past 2 decades, forests in Montana have actually become a carbon source instead of a carbon sink. A healthy forest absorbs carbon, a burning forest emits carbon. For years, lack of management has had negative impacts on wildlife habitat, ecosystems, watersheds, rural economies, and public safety. But now we're seeing even broader impacts on the housing market with the price of lumber. During the height of the pandemic, the price of lumber more than tripled, and even now, the volatile lumber market has increased the average single-family home price by nearly $20,000. Despite this, Montana lumber production has actually decreased by 11%, and we just had another mill close last December. When I was growing up in Montana, we had over 30 active sawmills. We're down now to one I can count on one hand and one finger. This is not for a lack of supply. Montana has over 9 million acres in need of treatment, and our annual timber harvest is half of what the allowable sale quantity studied and approved in our forest plans. Let me cut to the question here, Mr. Premier. How does this compare to the forestry permitting process in Alberta? And would you agree commercial timber harvest is often the best tool to accomplish our environmental objectives?
Yeah.
Because we're going to see it takes over 5 years to complete an EIS
Yeah.
and initiate forest management projects here in the United States.
100%. Fortunately, under our Constitution, provinces also regulate forestry production. And we've seen actually the exact opposite of your experience, a 30% increase in harvesting since 2011, a $6 billion increase in investment in our forestry industry. Last year was the best year in terms of volume of fiber and revenue for the industry. You know, I think I'm glad the province regulates this because we have within our province a large federal park called Jasper, where the forests have been absolutely destroyed by pine beetle because there was no responsible harvesting policy. So I think this vindicates local regulation of forestry.
And we're seeing that in Montana close here, Mr. Chairman, but our state lands, we're seeing those, on the leadership of our Governor Gene Forte in Montana, we're seeing increased harvests. Our federal lands, that's the problem. It sounds like it's a similar problem in Canada. Mr. Premier, thank you.
Thank you so much. And now Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in 2015, the chairman and I actually co-sponsored legislation. It was Senate Bill 1 to approve the Keystone XL pipeline. It passed the Senate, passed the House. It was vetoed by President Obama. Had it not been, it would today be bringing 830,000 barrels a day from Canada to the United States, which obviously would be of great help. And the likelihood is it would have been expanded, and it would be probably well over 1 million barrels a day versus trying to get it from some adversary, be that somebody in OPEC or Venezuela or somewhere else. So how do we go forward now as partners? And I'm going to talk about another fantastic partnership we have, the Dakota Gasification Company in North Dakota. Takes lignite coal, converts it to synthetic natural gas, captures the CO2, and sends it to the Weyburn oil fields in Saskatchewan. And there it's put downhole for tertiary oil recovery. And that's been operating successfully for well over a decade. What a great partnership. How do we go forward, Premier, and build on these partnerships now? Looking, and I've given you an example of one that obviously should be in place, Keystone XL, and another one that is in place and operating very effectively, providing coal-fired, in this case, electricity, but also synthetic natural gas, and then also producing more oil through the tertiary oil recovery. Great partnership between our two nations. Together, we have incredible resources. How do we cut through some of these regulatory decisions that have impeded our ability to produce more energy with the greatest technology and the best environmental stewardship? How do we cut through and get that message to people in both countries so we can get more of these things done?
Thank you, Senator. Great question. I won't pretend that Canada or Alberta has an optimal system for regulation and regulatory certainty. To the contrary, we've had huge regulatory delays and uncertainty, particularly around pipelines. But with respect to production and permitting, that's primarily controlled by the provincial governments on oil and gas in Canada. And we have reduced by 20% the regulatory burden for permitting, and we've accelerated by about 60% the speed of permitting for a conventional oil and gas project. So I would just add, in Canada, one aspect of regulatory delays is often associated with the need of the government, the Crown, to consult adequately with Indigenous people, with what we call our First Nations. And a key part of that is involving them in a beneficial way in the industry, in resource development. I think we're developing a very good model in Alberta of Indigenous participation, including equity co-ownership of major resource projects, so that they feel fully like they're participants in resource development.
So what do you see in Canada today in terms of your resource development and working with the United States? Are you still committed to producing energy not only for your own country, but bringing it to the United States so that together, as North America, we are truly energy sufficient? Or are you dissuaded from doing that? What kind of things should we in Congress do to try to build that relationship and promote more partnering in energy development for the good of both nations?
Thank you, Senator. I think the predicate of your question is this concept of a North American Energy Alliance. And I think it's manifestly in the interests of both the American and the Canadian people to develop that policy framework. As I mentioned earlier, the administration regards the production of Canadian critical minerals as, for all intents and purposes, American critical minerals under the Title III of the Defense Production Act. I think a similar policy approach should be taken to Canadian oil and gas and other energy resources. For starters, stop efforts to shut down current infrastructure for Line 5 going through Michigan. Secondly, accelerate regulatory approval of pipeline optimization projects so that we can ship you more. Thirdly, let's work together to see, can we bring back something like another major pipeline between Alberta and the United States? It may require governments participating in de-risking that, because capital markets have been, the private sector has been spooked by that veto. And I don't think you're going to have a pipeline company coming to market with a $10 billion plus project with so much political and regulatory uncertainty. I think we as governments need to be more forward-leaning to de-risk projects like that.
Right, which takes both the provincial or the state government and our respective federal governments to work with us to do it, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thanks to all of you. Appreciate it very much. Mr. Chairman, thanks for holding.
Thank you, Senator. And we're going to do a real quick second round real quick. And I know I'm going to go right to Minister Wilkinson, if I may. Sir, I understand what a little bit what's going on, and I want all of you to understand. I want my administration, I want my government to understand how important it is for this relationship and how much more we can both do. We all have a responsibility to the climate. We have a responsibility to the energy that we need, and understanding what the world appetite is so that we can do it better, cleaner than any place in the world. Hydrogen, I know, Mr. Wilkinson, you come from a hydrogen background and you understand it. I also think I'm very, very much interested in hydrogen, how we promote more of it in America. We've been promoting EVs, and I think at the detriment of basically making ourselves totally reliant and being held hostage by foreign supply chains. That's why I think our relationship in energy and critical minerals is so important. I also believe that as we move forward in America, we're going to start requiring that all the pipelines that we do are dual-purposed, that they're properly coated, properly using the proper steel components to be able to carry both gas and as we transition. So if you can tell me what you are doing in your government and how you're looking at hydrogen, and let's say that in areas such as Alberta, Saskatchewan, some of your larger energy-producing areas of your country, how that can be supportive and how it can be helpful.
Thank you, Senator, and I agree with everything that you said. Hydrogen, I think, is going to be extremely important as an energy carrier as we move forward in a whole range of different
we can do it. We don't have to rely on any supply chains, any foreign supply chains. We can do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And both Canada and the United States are well placed to actually be producers of large quantities of hydrogen. In Canada, we can go both directions. One is producing using electricity, which is what Quebec would normally do. The other is producing ultra low carbon hydrogen from natural gas, capturing the CO2, which is Alberta, Saskatchewan. We see Canada as an emerging hydrogen vehicle for the world, certainly for Western Europe. We see working with the United States on ensuring that we're building up transportation corridors and linking up hydrogen hubs that we're both developing as a way for us to accelerate progress on this. And I totally agree with you that any infrastructure that we are thinking about putting into place going forward needs to be hydrogen capable. We are looking right now at trying to enable liquid natural gas exports from Eastern Canada to Europe, but it will need to be in the context of it being hydrogen capable so that we can actually ensure that we're moving through this transition and we're not ending up with stranded assets. So absolutely agree with you. This is an enormous opportunity for North America, and it is something that we need to work on together.
And if I may ask Premier Kenney and all three of you, what's the thing that we need to do most with the cooperation of our two countries and the impediments that you're running into? We understand that your permitting process is about 2 years. Ours could go as long as 10, 12 because of our court actions. We're trying to get that down and making sure that we can compete and do it on a timely fashion. But if you can give the greatest obstacle, all four of you that might see that we could work on, the critical factor that you want us in the United States to give attention to that would be helpful for this relationship to continue to flourish, because we need each other very badly.
Senator, don't have enough familiarity with the U.S. permitting process to offer useful advice. I'll just say that in our own backyard in Alberta, as I mentioned, we've cut red tape by 20% on permitting for.
Well, the greatest obstacle you have, Premier, as far as working with the United States government or coming into our markets or us going into your markets or the transfer, is there any impediment there that you think in the trade that we have?
Well, I mean, look, I hate to come back to it yet again, but the veto of KXL sent a message that the government of the United States does not want substantially more Canadian energy. So this has, I think, impeded investor confidence. As I just said, you're not going to get a midstream company coming to market to risk that again, that kind of capital again. So I think we needed a message from the administration about regulatory certainty.
Sure.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. I would add to that for the mining sector, we are already having discussions with people from the administration, from the United States. A month ago, I was in Washington with with colleagues in Quebec, and we had meetings with the DOE, DOD, the Department of Interior, and as well as the Department of Commerce. And we're looking at different ways of having greater collaboration. And it could be co-investing, it could be offtake agreements, but we need to have a transparent dialogue with all the stakeholders.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to go a bit of a different direction with this. From an electricity perspective, I think the greatest challenge that we face both in Canada and the United States is our government and your administration have both committed to a net zero electricity grid by 2035. To be able to achieve that is going to take a significant effort, certainly in Canada. We are now getting a better sense of what the government's vision is for the pathway to 2035, but it needs to be done in a manner that is coordinated between Canada and the United States.
The largest world polluters are looking at 2050. They moved it out 15 years, or 2050 is what they thought. And even then, they don't think they can make it at 2050. Yeah. You're accelerating to 2035 because you think that's achievable, or it's a lofty goal for us to shoot for?
Well, we are committed to a net zero economy by 2050.
Gotcha.
A net zero electricity grid is a commitment that both President Biden and our Prime Minister has made for 2035. So from an electricity sector perspective, our focus very much is on the immediacy of 2035 first. And we want to assure that that's done in a coordinated fashion, given the interconnected nature of our electricity systems. And then looking out at 2050, the 2050 target is one that's going to require, at least in Canada, 2 to 3 times more non-emitting electricity that we produce today. And so that is a very significant lift, and it will only be achieved if we do it in a coordinated and a collaborative fashion between Canada and the U.S.
And Senator, maybe I could just say a word. I mean, I completely agree that there needs to be a much more strategic approach to North American energy. And that certainly very much includes the energy sources and the associated materials that are going to be really required in the future. That includes hydrogen, it includes critical minerals. It certainly includes technologies around carbon capture and nuclear technologies, including small modular reactors. I think one of the things that we have to do, and I think there's complete alignment between the Biden administration and what we are aiming to do in that regard. But I think one of the things that we have to collectively do is ensure that we don't allow irritants to get in the way of the kind of cooperation that we need to be having. So the ZEV tax credit, for example, which would have, had huge implications for the Canadian auto manufacturing industry because of the way it was structured. Line 5. Which, there's no point in going backwards here in terms of energy security. That would be a step backwards. The same thing with, American tariffs on solar panels that are manufactured in Canada. It was intended to go against China. It ended up boomeranging on Canada. So we need to actually be strategic and thoughtful about how we partner in a way that's going to be good for both countries and allow us to advance to address climate change and energy security concurrently.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up, Premier Kenney, on something that Mr. Bradley just talked about. He talked about this commitment by President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau with their, what I view as extremely aggressive goals for electric grids in North America, because by the year 2035, and now we're in 2022, you're talking 13 years from now, the two leaders want to eliminate all natural gas and all coal as sources of electricity. In the United States, 61% of our electricity comes from natural gas and coal. So, Premier Kenney, are you concerned that such aggressive goals are going to create reliability problems at the border and for people in your
Yes, frankly, yes, Senator. We agree about the urgency of reducing emissions, and that's why, in fact, Alberta will have completely shifted away from thermal coal, which was 5 years ago our major source of electricity generation. So there are huge investments in coal to gas conversions, but we don't have hydro in Alberta. We don't have nuclear, and obviously it takes a long time horizon to develop nuclear. So if the federal government requires us to move away from natural gas without a reliable baseload alternative, we won't have a reliable electricity grid, which would obviously be devastating to our economy. So we want to have ambitious emissions reduction goals, but they have to be realistic. And natural gas is going to be part of our future. I agree completely with Minister Wilkinson. Alberta is going to be a key global hub, for example, in producing low-emitting hydrogen products, but that requires natural gas feedstock.
So on the first day of office, President Biden killed the Keystone XL pipeline linking Canada to the United States. In May, he then lifted sanctions that allowed Nord Stream 2, linking Russia to Germany. I've been outspoken on my opposition to that. Nord Stream 2 ended up getting built. Keystone was not. Did the president oppose the wrong pipeline?
I would argue yes, Senator.
And then we talked about a little earlier, this joint partnership between President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau when they came out with their roadmap last year. And together they stated, "It is a shared interest of the United States and Canada to revitalize and expand our historic alliance and steadfast friendship." They also pledged to recognize the important economic and energy security benefits of the bilateral energy relationship and its highly integrated infrastructure. I believe that since President Biden took office, he has not been a good energy partner or a good partner to Canada. What's your assessment of that, and how can we improve this partnership?
Well, I've mentioned some ideas. For starters, first, do no harm. And I do not understand why the administration of the United States, which is pleading with OPEC to ship more, is taking a neutral position about an effort to shut down the shipment of over 500,000 barrels a day of light sweet Canadian energy to the upper Midwest through Governor Whitmer's effort to decommission Line 5. Now, we appreciate that Government of Canada and the Government of the United States are currently in negotiations about resolving this as a treaty dispute, but I don't think there should have to be negotiations. I think the Government of the United States should make it clear that it is contrary to the national interests of this country to shut down that project for starters. I think a strategic decision to treat Canadian energy as though it were American energy and really enter into a true alliance would send a hugely important signal to our companies, our upstream companies and our midstream companies, that there will be a future market here. that you're not hostile to Canadian energy. As I said, look, if we were serious about this, we could achieve within 5 years a complete elimination of North American imports of OPEC energy. That would be demonstrably good for the world environment and global peace and security.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hicken.
You know, I just would like to add, again, my appreciation for your attendance and participation today, but also of how much I support the vision of the greater North American energy, all of the above, and recognizing that our guiding light does have to be that the climate is changing much more rapidly than any of us would want. We're seeing it's an increase there's a larger percent of our landscape that is increasingly hostile to habitation and the production of food. And it's going to take a long time to we have to find effective ways and efficient ways to get carbon out of the air. But I think some of the benefits that we could have by working together, we're just, and you've all pointed this out today, we're stepping on our own greatest opportunity. I think the import of solar panels from Canada was that Mr. Wilkinson that mentioned that? We're going through that issue right now. The Commerce Department again is looking at the provenance of solar panels that could put our solar industry on its back for an extended period of time. For what real point? I mean, I understand the arguments on both sides. I'm not saying that I shouldn't say for what real point, but I understand the point. I don't think it's relevant in terms of trying to deal with a massive problem like climate, which is what all of you are clearly doing. So hopefully this hearing is a foundation that allows us to go forward and really begin looking at what an alliance would look like in a more pragmatic way. And I agree with all of you that it's got to work on the state level and the local level as well. But it'll never succeed without the cooperation and the orchestration of the federal governments involved. So, and I would hope that we could all work with Mexico as well. I think that they could be a very active and powerful partner in a lot of these issues, solar panels included. Anyway, I have no further questions, just admiration and appreciation.
Thank you, Senator. Let me say to all of you, I appreciate so much. We've been looking forward to this for quite some time, and it's been very, very helpful. What I will say is that I think the world's looking to North America right now, and that includes all of us working together. What I do see as the problem, and I've said this, my administration, with all the goodwill and intent that they have, and all of our concerns that we have responsibility to this beautiful planet that we've been able to occupy, to do the best we can. But with that, I've said this, this called global climate. It's not called Canadian climate. It's not called United States climate. It's called global. And we have done more in the, I'm going to say the last 2 decades, probably to clean up using the fossils that we use in a cleaner fashion, which is the world's depending upon. And when I watch what China, they keep talking about China renewables, China renewables. China has 3,000 coal-fired plants, and they're building 400 more. They're not taking their foot off the pedal at all. India had 500 to up to 800, and they want to build 100 more. United States is going down. You all have basically gone down. Everybody has tried to be as responsible. You take the developing nations of the world and the leaders of the world, such as us and you take us out of the fossil industry before we have the replacement that the rest of the world can move into. God help us. God help the climate, because the rest of them will not do what we're going to do. They won't do what we have done in this free democracy that we all live in and the freedoms that we all enjoy. We've done it because it was the right thing to do. But taking us out of that industry before we have a replacement, and all I've said is the United States of America should go down 2 paths. We should basically make sure that we have reliable, secured energy for a period of time going through this transition as we are investing in the technology. You cannot eliminate your way to a cleaner climate. You can innovate your way to it. And when those crisscross and you give me as much out of what I'm getting out of the fossil now, dependable, reliable, and affordable, and when you can give me that based on dispatchable, reliable power whenever I want it, from the new technology that we are coming and we will be designing and developing, that's when the market takes over. It's not us making government decisions. It'll be the market that makes those decisions. But we have everybody afraid, well, if we do this and we build this great alliance in North America, we will become so good and so efficient in what we're doing, it'll just be basically prolonging us using fossil when people want us not to. And I only said I can speak from just my position and one vote as a senator, that I will not vote to support the European model of what they're dealing with today. I think we can do it better. And that's why I came to Canada, to see if you all would join us in the North American Alliance, and maybe we can get Mexico, as Senator Hickenlooper. We want to do that. But we have the ability, and I am scared to death that what Xi Jinping is watching, what Putin did with energy, is what he would do with the critical minerals for our computer chips, for basically the cathodes and anodes and the processing. And right now, I think both of our countries are dependent on what's coming from Russia in the technology end of it for us to be able to transition. I don't want to transition and be totally reliant on foreign supply chains. That's just me. And Minister Wilkinson, that's why I said energy is something, hydrogen is something I know we can do. So I've looked at that very astutely, and basically very encouraging that there's so much more that needs to be done. But again, I can say, I don't think we can do it without each other, and I think we need each other. I appreciate very much. We want to break down these barriers. We want to make common sense decisions. We don't want to take away and shoot ourselves any more than we already have, and I think we can heal the wounds that we have. And I just appreciate, and I hope you have a safe journey back home. Look forward to visiting you soon. And with that, let me just say, members will have until close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record if they weren't able to submit today. I appreciate this climate partnership that we've been able to speak about. And also, I want to thank you again, and this committee will stand adjourned.